fake police videos. In 2016, I was arrested in Boulder City for protesting a police enforcement activity, a crosswalk sting. I did this by crossing the street in a crosswalk repeatedly.
Police assigned an operative to saunter back and forth in a crosswalk. Any motorists who didn't stop were chased and ticketed. One of them, John Hunt, responded by staging a one-man protest in which he walked back and forth across the street 3 times in 1 minute. That was more than enough for Boulder City Sergeant John Glenn.
The interesting thing about this arrest is that the dashcam video I was given of it was fake. The audio had been cut and spliced. My own dialogue had been rearranged with new dialogue from the officer to make the arrest look justified. I know this sounds outlandish, like something from a science fiction movie, but it's true. Almost 2 years after this incident, the same thing happened to a young couple in Las Vegas. The man was shot to death by police, and his fiancée swore emphatically that the audio had been changed to make the officer's actions seem justified.
I remember when we got pulled over, they told us to get the out of the car. For him to get the out of the car. Why didn't I hear that in the video?
She says police cut that part out, that her boyfriend told officers he was dropping his gun, and that he said, "Don't shoot me."
What's more likely, that we both made up this same outlandish story, or that we both came up with this exact story because that's what really happened to both of us? The other interesting thing about this case is what the government did to cover it up. I want to play you a video clip, and then I want to explain why this clip should be the key to ending multiple careers.
So what's this new, explain to me your understanding of what Count 4 is.
Well, as I was quickly preparing this complaint to beat the deadline, it occurred to me that there was this other offense that occurred, and that is that he interfered with a lawful activity that the police were attempting to perform at that intersection, and that is indeed a different violation, so I included it.
That was former city attorney Dave Olson. He's explaining the circumstances of his decision to file charges against me, and what led him to resurrect my previously dismissed criminal case with a new charge tacked on. You see, Boulder City quickly dismissed my charges of crossing the street in a crosswalk, in June of 2016. But at that same hearing, then City Attorney Dave Olson handed my attorney, Stephen Stubbs, a DVD. He said it was something they wanted us to see. We went back to Stubbs' office, and he put the disc into his laptop. That was the first time I saw the fake arrest video. While it was still playing, I said out loud, "That's so fake." This was something I had never heard of, a police video with the audio rearranged. It was something Stephen had never heard of either. At that point, I couldn't be certain the video was fake. I just strongly suspected it. And I struggled with that doubt. I knew that, if it was fake, this was an incredibly important scientific discovery that many more people had to know about. Over the course of the next year, we hired experts to evaluate the tape's authenticity. Finally, when we weren't able to garner any significant attention toward this story, I sued Boulder City in the hopes of getting the real tape. That was when Dave Olson refiled charges against me. Charges that had been laying dormant for more than 11 months were suddenly resurrected, with a new charge tacked on. I was found guilty in Boulder City, in a totally fair, unbiased, and non-rigged trial.
Judge Miller already had to recuse himself for unethical behavior. So the fix is in Boulder City, that's for sure. The fix is in.
Found guilty on the basis of the same fake evidence that I was only being prosecuted for trying to expose. Fortunately, the case was thrown out on appeal by Judge Richard Scotti, who ruled that the prosecution itself had been illegal. Vindictive prosecution. You see, you're not allowed to sit on charges for more than 11 months and then refile them with another charge tacked on, only after you get sued. It looks vindictive. It is vindictive. And if you're allowed to get away with doing that, it makes everyone else in the population more afraid to exercise their constitutional rights. In response to being found guilty of vindictive prosecution, Boulder City tried to have Judge Scotti disqualified. When that failed, Boulder City went to the Supreme Court with a writ to have Scotti's decision overturned. The Supreme Court rejected this writ in a 7-0 unanimous decision. opting not to even hear oral arguments on the matter. What happened next is shocking and baffling. After the Supreme Court had ruled to uphold Scotty's decision, Boulder City filed a motion with Judge Scotty to get him to reconsider. We all thought that the case was over. Everyone thinks that once you've won at the Supreme Court, you've won. But not this time. Judge Scotty granted Boulder City's motion and decided to hold an evidentiary hearing to determine whether my prosecution would be reinstated. Again, my prosecution based on fake evidence that was only brought because I raised the alarm about that same fake evidence. Now we're getting to the relevance of that quote.
Well, as I was quickly preparing this complaint to beat the deadline, it occurred to me that there was this other offense that occurred.
In this evidentiary hearing, Judge Scotty allowed Dave Olson and new city attorney Steve Morris to present a cockamamie, rehearsed, and ridiculous story. You see, it wasn't the case that Dave Olson was retaliating against me for filing a lawsuit by reviving a criminal complaint that had laid dormant for over 11 months, with a new charge added on. No, what really happened was just that Dave Olson was so busy that whole entire year, and without a paralegal, that he simply forgot to file the completed charges that he had already drafted some time before, and that he was simply reminded to file the already completed criminal charges after he got sued.
Before the filing of the new complaint, there was a period of time when things were delayed because I was literally swamped, and I did not have a paralegal at that period of time, and I was preparing for retirement. So the complaint sat on my desk for a period of time, and then when we were served on May 31st, that's when I realized that the time was running out on my filing of the complaint, and so I filed the complaint.
You see, if Olson had always been intending to prosecute me the whole time, and just forgot to because he was so busy preparing for retirement, then his motivation for prosecuting me couldn't have been vindictive at all. He was simply reminded to file a complaint he had already drafted and completed. Nothing illegal here. He repeated this perjurious story over and over again before Judge Scotty, who allowed him to testify off camera in a remote hearing.
So the filing of the complaint, I had been working on it, but it was delayed because I was swamped. I didn't have a paralegal at the time, and I was preparing for retirement. I prepared part of it. Please understand that during that year's period of time, I worked on it several different times. I'd done research, had done drafting, and so this was just trying to finish things off and file the complaint.
Again, he claimed that he had been working on the charges all year and doing research on them, and that my lawsuit simply reminded him to file an already finished criminal complaint. Stephen shredded this story in many ways. Olson's two excuses for not filing the charges in a timely manner were that he was busy preparing for retirement and that he didn't have a paralegal. Well, it turns out that Olson was told to retire in February of 2017, and that he had a paralegal until April of 2017. So for the 6 or so months when he had all the evidence and could have filed charges, neither of those excuses were true. Additionally, Stephen got Olson to admit that 2 of the 5 charges he filed were a mistake.
Okay, but then you recharged it after Mr. Hunt filed the civil federal rights lawsuit, correct?
That would be count 1 in the revised complaint?
Yes.
Yes, that was a mistake on my part, no question about it.
What was a mistake?
Filing that charge. If we had already disposed of the citation.
Really? This was something he was researching for 11 months? And he didn't realize that 2 out of the 5 charges were a mistake to file? But beyond that, his entire story, that the new charges were completed before Boulder City got sued, is completely contradicted by videotaped deposition testimony he gave 2 years earlier.
So what's this new, explain to me your understanding of what count 4 is.
Well, as I was quickly preparing this complaint to beat the deadline, it occurred to me that there was this other offense that occurred, and that is that he interfered with a lawful activity that the police were attempting to perform at that intersection, and that is indeed a different violation, so I included it.
Something cannot be true at the same time as its own contradiction. For instance, it cannot be raining and not raining at the same time. Likewise, it is impossible to add another charge to a criminal complaint after you got sued if you had already completed the criminal complaint before you got sued. So this entire story that Dave Olson presented to Richard Scotti was a blatant, perjurous lie that had been clearly rehearsed, and which Scotti allowed Olson to testify to off camera. And Scotti went along with it, effectively overturning the Supreme Court's decision to dispose of the case. Scotti granted Boulder City's motion for reconsideration on the basis of this perjurous testimony. Scotti let them off the hook, and my prosecution was reinstated. Now, I only uncovered this video clip after that ruling had been issued. But does the state bar think that's okay? To carry out an illegal prosecution against someone for years and years on the basis of fake evidence, just because they tried to expose the fake evidence, and then when you're held accountable, you go before a judge and lie like crazy just so that you can remove your own guilty verdict of vindictive prosecution? And does the state bar think that it's okay to effectively overturn a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court by committing perjury?
Now, there has been some testimony already about what may have jogged your memory. You previously testified that you had spent time working on this complaint throughout the year, but it had fallen under the stack of papers, if you will, or off of your priority list at some point. And you've also testified that the service of the federal civil action filed by Mr. Hunt jogged your memory.
Let's talk about Steve Morris. During that same hearing, Steve Morris attempted to downplay his role in the case by saying that he didn't draft the charges and he didn't directly prosecute me in court. He made it seem like he had almost nothing to do with this illegal prosecution. In reality, it was Steve Morris who decided to continue this prosecution when he took over as city attorney from Dave Olson. It was Steve Morris who appeared before Judge Victor Miller to argue that the arrest video wasn't fake. More on that in a moment. It was Steve Morris who tried to disqualify Judge Richard Scotti after he was found guilty of vindictive prosecution. It was Steve Morris who went to the Supreme Court with a writ based on this cockamamie and perjurious story. And it was Steve Morris who filed the motion for Judge Scotti to reconsider after Scotti's ruling had already been upheld by the Supreme Court. In truth, Steve Morris was the main driving force behind my prosecution, and he also fought vociferously in the federal court to prevent any evidence about the fake video from ever seeing the inside of a courtroom. Again, do we really think that Steve Morris totally believed Dave Olson's ridiculous story, that the reason Olson waited over 11 months to file charges was because he was busy preparing for retirement, and that he didn't have a paralegal, when neither of these things were even true for over 6 months of that time? There was even evidence that contradicted this story in the transcript of my trial, where Dave Olson said that he didn't review the case again after he had dismissed it. Question: after you dismissed the case, did you review the case again? Answer: no. Instead of looking at this evidence and thinking, maybe this is a clue that Dave Olson's story is false, all he did was try to bulldoze over this court transcript by calling it a fugitive document and claiming that it had been created illegally.
But they're proffering it as this is the statement, and our point is that this transcript is absolutely and 100% false.
So his theory is that this elderly shorthand court reporter
I typed it all up and I presented it to you.
Okay.
created a fake transcript of the trial, and that she also has superpowers to be able to ignore a judge removing her from the courtroom and confiscating her notes. This is a pattern of behavior for Steve Morris, who seems to view the truth as some kind of annoying obstacle to be bulldozed over so that he can win, rather than something you observe and respect and act in accordance with. If we go back to 2017, there was an evidentiary hearing in my case before Judge Victor Miller to determine whether there was any merit to my claim that the police video was fake. Shortly before this hearing took place, new evidence surfaced that seemed to vindicate my story. This was another dashcam video from NHP that contained distinct audio that the first recording did not contain. both the Boulder City Review and Channel 8 News found this new evidence credible enough to report on, with BC Review summarizing, second dashcam recording contradicts BC Police's version of crosswalk protest.
So, George, you talked about this alleged police misconduct. It's alleged in this federal lawsuit. What's at the core of that?
Well, there were multiple police dash cams at the scene of this and recorded the arrest of this guy. But when the Boulder City Police Department submitted its video and audio, there was material that was taken out of that was recorded on the other. So they're thinking somebody edited this thing.
It's hard to uncover vindicating evidence of your story that is credible enough for the news to report on if you aren't telling the truth. But Steve Morris looked right at this evidence and just decided that instead of looking into whether the police might actually be committing serious felonies by making fake videos, it was better to just keep putting the whole weight of the government on top of me, also that he could win in court, and so that the rest of the population could be deprived of potentially important knowledge about fake police videos. Let's not even mention the fact that Steve Morris is Victor Miller's religious superior, and that in the Mormon religion, someone with the rank of stake president like Steve Morris is believed to have divinely gifted powers of divination to be able to know the truth of reality without having to employ any kind of reasoning or examining any kind of evidence.
He's the boss. That is the best way to say it. He is the boss, with authority from God to speak for the people within Boulder City.
So all of these court rulings were basically a big layer cake of lies, fundamentally based on the absurd notion that this so-called Mormon holy man has a telepathic link to God. So to accommodate the hubris and the ego of this one person, and to protect the careers of a few people in a small town, the rest of the population gets deprived of useful knowledge about fake police videos for years and years.
And so my time is spent primarily on the day-to-day administrative matters of advising my clients, which are the city council.
Maybe he should have done less of that, because they liked him so much that they ended up firing him in a 4-to-1 vote.
Boulder City has fired their city manager and their city attorney. Happened during the city council meeting last night. There was a 4-to-1 vote to fire both city attorney Steve Morris and city manager Alfonso Noyola. The I-team has reported on complaints about both for years.
I don't know all the ins and outs of this firing, but it does nothing to dispel my notion that Steve Morris is a narcissistic psychopath who tends to act unethically in whatever situation he's in. So back to the question, did Steve Morris really believe Dave Olson's ridiculous story? I think we can definitively say that that is very unlikely. For one thing, he totally ignored the inconsistency with the trial transcript, trying instead to insist the transcript was inaccurate, even though he wasn't there for most of the trial, and this transcript is the only record of what went on. How can he possibly know that the trial transcript is inaccurate if he wasn't there for most of it and no other record exists? Leaving aside his Mormon clairvoyance, of course.
The reality is there's a lot of things that didn't find their way into that fugitive transcript that he's now trying to pawn off as being authentic.
In fact, there's good reason to think that he's the one who came up with this lie, because it really seemed like Dave Olson was being coached in that hearing, which Stephen called out at one point.
Okay. Are you being coached by anybody there?
No.
Okay. We can't see you, and so forgive me if I have suspicions, because it seems like I'm asking simple questions, and you answer one way, then you answer another, and it just goes around in like circles, and it's taking forever because I can't get straight answers from the beginning.
Maybe you can excuse all this by saying it's just a jaywalking case, and therefore that the fake video associated with it is somehow not a big deal. Well, does it seem like fake police videos are not a big deal to her?
I remember when we got pulled over, they told us to get the out of the car. For him to get the out of the car. Why didn't I hear that in the video?
Does the state bar think this is all fine to do? To carry on an illegal prosecution for many years, and then to cover it up with perjurious testimony so that you can effectively contravene the unanimous will of the Supreme Court? So that you can cover up a police conspiracy to make fake arrest videos, so that no one in the populace can ever find out the truth about what's going on, all for the sake of preserving your own career and your own reputation? Does the state bar think that's fine? and they should continue condoning this behavior by not removing the law licenses of Dave Olson and Steve Morris? Or do they perhaps think another course of action is more appropriate? My name is John Bridgeford Hunt. Thanks for watching.